we often don't think of vocation as a practice, which is tragic because we spend something like 2/3 of our life working, again, whether it's paid work or not. And if we cut that off from our spiritual life, we essentially cut Jesus out of the majority of our life. And in the church, we often spend the majority of our time talking about the minority of our day-to-day life. And like a practice, it is on a schedule. Like I'm guessing you have a time when you show up for Zoom tomorrow morning, or show up for class, or wake your children up, or show up to volunteer, whatever your work is, again, paid or unpaid. The word vocation itself comes from the Latin vocatio, and it just means calling. Now, there are 3 or so layers to calling or vocation in biblical theology. Just give me a minute here. First layer, we are called to follow Jesus. This is the main word. If you just Google search or do a word study on calling in the New Testament, it's the main way it's used. Our first and primary call is just to Jesus, not to a job or a career. And this means whether you have the privilege and the agency to dream about what career is a good fit for you, or whether, like most Christians around the world, you are living somewhat hand to mouth, you have a calling from God. You have a destiny in God's great universe, and one day you will co-rule with Jesus over all of the universe. And if you think that sounds crazy, read the last 2 chapters of the Bible. Secondly, we are called to do our work as an act of discipleship to Jesus. We often don't think of work as an act of discipleship. So maybe you get up at 6 and you have a half hour or an hour set aside for scripture and prayer. You think of that as discipleship, but then you have to be at work at 8 and you don't think of that as discipleship as well. But think about it. Jesus was a carpenter for decades. If he came today, he could very well have been a carpenter or a tradesman or a construction worker or a software engineer or a barista or an artist or a small business owner, meaning he could very well do what you do. We must come to view our work, whether it is our job or our work as a stay-at-home parent or a caregiver or volunteer, whether it is glamorous or mundane, whether it's our dream or just a way to pay the bills. We must view it as a key facet of our apprenticeship to Jesus, as the place that most of us spend the bulk of our time, and I would argue, in particular for those of you who are single, as the primary context in our spiritual formation. The place that we work out with God and community in prayer, our spiritual life, the daily invitations we receive to grow and mature, to face our shadow, to come face to face with our sin, our fear, our attachments, all of the stuff of the spiritual life. Third layer is we are called to play our role in the family of God and the flourishing of humanity. We beat up a lot around here on Western individualism, but honestly, you could argue that individualism comes out of Christian theology. Unmoored from God and church and family, it's turned toxic in the West. But the idea that you are, in the language of Psalm 139, fearfully and wonderfully made, and that the days ordained for you were written in God's book before one of them came to be, meaning that you have a person that God made you to be and a calling, something that God has made you to do. That idea comes right out of Christian and biblical theology. In Christian theology, your calling isn't something you choose, like your career or where you go to college or if you go to college or what city you land in. It's much deeper than that. It's something that you discover, that you unearth and excavate from your inner man and woman, and often that you and I have to surrender to and let go of control to God for. Culture says, I am what I do. Scripture says, I do what I am. Those of you in the room, myself included, with privilege, get to dream about finding a source of income that is in line with our call from God. And then in Christian theology, that comes with the onus of responsibility to do the hard work of justice, to extend that opportunity to as many as possible. Much could be said about that. Not all of us achieve that. Most Christians around the world don't even get the chance to try, and that's okay. You still have a vocation, a calling from God. Those of us who do, it often takes decades to get a job that is the right fit. And no matter how great your job is, all work is full of toil, mundanity, and disappointment. Even at its best, work is not God and the ground is cursed. But still, we have a calling from God, a unique contribution built into your genetic code with the way that God wired you, no matter what your origin was with your parents. Thinking about some of you that are very aware that you were not wanted by your parents. You were to your parents an accident or a mistake. But there are no accidents, there are no mistakes in God's great universe. You were born with a destiny. You were not just the product of random chemical reactions between two drunken lovers. You were the soul designed and built and dreamed up by God himself with a destiny in his great universe. And whatever you were born into or not born into, you have a calling from God, a person that God made you to be, and a unique contribution that God made you.